This is Linux in Laws, a podcast on topics around free and open source software, any associated contraband, communism, the revolution in general, and whatever else fancies your tickle. Please note that this and other episodes may contain strong language, offensive humor, and other certainly not politically correct language. You have been warned. Our parents insisted on this disclaimer. Happy, Mum? Thus, the content is not suitable for consumption in the workplace, especially when played back on a speaker in an open plan office or similar environments. Any minors under the age of 35 or any pets, including fluffy little killer bunnies, your trusted guide dog, unless on speed, and cute T-Rexes or other associated dinosaurs. Welcome to Linux in Laws, Season 2, Episode 6. Martin, how are things?
Yeah, not too bad, as they say.
I
Room for improvement.
I understand that the British government is still in place for some odd, strange reason.
Some of it, yeah, not all of it. Yeah.
And a certain Mr. Cameron has made a reappearance. We are recording
this
in July of 2057. Mr. Cameron has joined the UK Parliament for the 75th time or something like this.
It's probably run out of gigs to do or something. It needs to do something about its popularity.
Fair enough, but this is not a podcast about politics, but rather about open source topics. And with that, I would like to introduce tonight's guests, Eddie Morrow and Matthew Wild from a body called the XMPP Foundation. But before I get things even more wrong, why don't you introduce yourself, Matthew and Eddie?
Hi. Yes. So I'm Matthew Wild, and I am currently the executive director of the XMPP Standards Foundation. It's a volunteer role with a small organization who basically govern the protocol that is XMPP, which I'm sure we're going to talk about more in this episode.
Eddie.
Yeah, hi everyone. Hi, Eddie. Well, my full name is Edward Morrow, and I'm also this year member of the XMPP Standards Foundation board, and also leader of the communication team we have as a task force internally, and also happy user and supporter of the network.
Before we go further, gentlemen, for these two people in the audience that do not know, because they have been living under a rock for the last 20 plus years, what XMPP is, maybe we should shed a little bit of light on this more than just important protocol and why this has made a foray for the last 20 plus years.
Yeah, sure. So sometime back in the previous century, a guy called Jeremy Miller, he got together with some friends who also agreed that the big instant messaging networks were a bit too closed, too large, too isolated, and wanted to try and break down some of these barriers. And so back then, those giants were MSN, AOL, Yahoo, and a totally different group of names to what we have today. And
wow, that's definitely last century, wasn't it? AOL.
Exactly, yes. So XMPP has been around a long time, and it came from those roots. But ultimately, what they built was similar to how you have a multi-protocol messenger. Pigeon, for example, was probably the best example of one of those. They decided to move that to the server side so that you could run gateways to different protocols and networks, and then developers could just implement one protocol that was openly published and collaboratively developed, and through using that protocol, then they could access these networks without having to have any proprietary stuff on their system or any reverse engineered, because these networks were always trying to close off the third-party developers who were trying to access their network on behalf of the users. So the idea was to have these gateways, and then over time, people realized that actually just using the open protocol for everything was great. They could as long as everyone was on XMPP, then they could message each other and communicate that way, and that often ended up with a much better experience because it was more reliable, because you didn't have to translate between these different protocols. And so over the years, it was originally called Jabber, and it transitioned to XMPP when it got standardized at the IETF, which is the organization that standardizes internet protocols for the web, for email, and all that. And so XMPP is standardized there as like a messaging protocol. And so yeah, we've had quite a history. Some of your listeners who've been around a while probably remember that XMPP was used by Google in the Google Talk service, which to this day is still their longest running messaging service that they've managed to have, and they've had quite a few attempts. So I think the runner-up is Hangouts, which they retired. I think it was last year or earlier this year. But ultimately, the dream of having everyone use this interoperable open protocol is still just out of reach. But we're not giving up. There are positive things happening that make it seem like it could actually happen now, if not before. So we're all still working away on this.
Did we? Sorry, I'm just wondering. Did we actually tell what the abbreviation means?
Yeah, exactly. Knowledge base. Please do elaborate on the
Okay.
acronyms.
XMPP stands for Extensible, so the X in Extensible Messaging Presents Protocol, and that's the abbreviation. But I agree, it's maybe not the most catchy name, but we stick to it. Twitter just reduced it to one letter, so why not stay with 4, right?
The wrong one, of course.
No,
you mentioned Jabber, but before we continue, maybe you can shed some light on this name.
Sure. So the original project was called Jabber, and then the original developers of the project set up a company called Jabber Inc. And they did some different commercial stuff. They had some clients and so on. And during the standardization process, the IETF said, well, we can't name this standard Jabber because it's a trademark. It's it's a nice catchy name, but we need something more boring, like SMTP or IMAP. So we ended up with XMPP as the protocol name. And then most people would still refer to the actual protocol and the network and the software around it and the ecosystem generally as Jabber. And Jabber Inc. Provided what was back then the Jabber Software Foundation with a license so that open source projects could use the name Jabber without a fear of contravening the trademark. And then around I don't remember which year it was exactly, but basically Cisco acquired Jabber Inc. And so they acquired the trademark with that, and they'd never caused us any problems, but I think there's been a general trend to move away from using Jabber as the name for things. A lot of people still do, and a lot of people still promote it as that. And I've no problem with that, but generally, when we're talking about the protocol, we'll always talk about XMPP, and maybe if we're talking to people who are more familiar with the Jabber term, then we'll we'll be happily using that.
But Jabba has nothing to do with the famous Prime Lord of Tatooine origin, I suppose.
I think it's spelled slightly differently.
I see. Thank you very much, Martin. I see.
You're welcome,
Okay,
yeah.
fair enough. I was confused about these.
Yes.
So it turns out if you're listening, this is not about you. So don't worry. And mercenaries, please just don't change.
Yes. While we're on words and things, the extensible part, can you shed a bit more light on? Okay, so clearly a protocol defines how services interact with each other, but what types of extensions do we think about when we for XMPP?
Sure. So at its core, XMPP is a messaging protocol. It allows carrying all kinds of data, and although it's commonly used for chat, and that was its original purpose, it has been used for many other things, like smart devices, Internet of Things kind of stuff, and various things like that. So basically, the core that we standardized at the IETF specifies a very bare bones kind of framework, and it's XML based, which I know isn't that trendy these days, but I promise you, I've used XML in a lot of places, and I hate all of them, except in XMPP, where I feel like we managed to somehow pluck out the good bits or the better bits, and then we didn't turn it into this horrible XML based monster. So it's still pretty lightweight, but the main thing that we use from that for the extensibility is that you can add things into the protocol without breaking interoperability, which in an open ecosystem is very important, because you can't just roll out a new version of the protocol and expect that everyone is going to update on exactly the same day. So you need to be able to phase things in and phase other things out. And so we use XML namespaces for that. And so that's how basically we have the underlying framework. And then on top of that, we've added features and evolved things. And we've not just added features, but also removed features that didn't make sense anymore. And so it's been very important over the 20 plus years that we've been around for XMPP's evolution to be able to use this feature to add and remove building blocks from the ecosystem and make sure that everyone can still talk to each other.
Matthew, what's wrong with XML? I mean, disk manufacturers just love it, and it goes down well with CPU manufacturers too. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, it's had its bad press, but there are some extremely well optimized XML parsers around. There are benchmarks that can easily pitch it as comparable to other markup languages and JSON and so on. I think its main problem really is that it doesn't, I mean, this is getting technical, but it doesn't map directly to an in-memory data structure. So, you can just throw a piece of JSON at your JSON.parse and you'll get back a nice simple structure. Whereas with XML, you have to know how to interpret it first, which, that's part of, it's partly that way because of the extensibility stuff. But I think that means that it's not a good fit for a lot of things that people tried to use it for. And I remain of the opinion that it was a good fit and still is for XMPP.
Yeah, but I mean, JSON and, pardon the pun now, YAML is for hipsters, no? I mean, us old folks just prefer something that is almost Turing complete and can be parsed nicely if you just throw enough hardware in it. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yes, YAML, I believe, is also Turing complete. So, yes.
Fair enough. Given the fact that this has been around for quite some time, and needless to say, there's an ecosystem which we're going to touch on in a minute or two. Where do you see the current state of things at the moment, given the pervasiveness of the reference implementations plus the thriving ecosystem around the standard? Because everybody and its dog are using XMPP if they're not hipsters, because these people probably prefer Mastodon or Matrix. But we're going to touch upon that in a minute.
Sure. So the current status, I think I referred to XMPP's golden age as being around a decade ago, when we were celebrating the win of Google Talk, adopting XMPP, and a number of other providers. But ultimately, they ended up closing their doors and putting walls around their services again, as they realized that actually they no longer had control about being able to deliver ads or being able to track people once they learned out how to use end-to-end encryption and things like that. So these kinds of features that XMPP had were fundamentally incompatible with these providers, and they could have still maintained some kind of subset of XMPP, and Google did that for a while. They stopped developing Google Talk, but it continued to remain available. It just didn't have any more features for a long time. So it kind of stagnated. And so in some ways it was a relief when they turned it off. But then after that happened, there was obviously a bit of a lull in XMPP usage. And I think that sucked a lot of developer mindshare out of the project. But in recent years, and in some ways, I almost thank Matrix for this. I think there's been a renewed interest in federated messaging and Mastodon as well. I think people are starting to realize that actually this is a sensible model. It is one that we should be following, and the question is just how do we do it? And well, XMPP is here. It's been through all this before. It's mature, and it's still actively being developed. And we have had a bunch more projects starting in the past 5-10 years than we had just before that. So I'm very enthusiastic about the current status of things, and people seemingly increasingly aware of the problems that XMPP is solving.
May I chip in here? Just to be clear, one may think right now, okay, what another chat app, or why this chat app now? XMPP incorporates federated infrastructure. So what does it mean? Everyone, and that's maybe a little analogy. If you don't know what it means with this decentralization and all this stuff, everyone has likely an email address, and the way you communicate with email addresses, okay, you have your email address, you install one of the 10,000 email clients, you write an email to another email address, and it just works. Why does it work? Because the communication between these two clients and or the software is just standardized. Same likely with HTTPS, which standardizes how a website works, right? And what you do with it is maybe up to you, but the communication in this case is standardized, same as email is. And out of this, we hope to, or we try to develop software that not just fits one purpose, but in the end is able to exchange the communication expected with just, if you want just one account, you can have multiple ones, but this is basically the communication we try to incorporate here. I hope I'm just repeating this just to be clear what this technology incorporates.
To me, I think when I'm trying to explain it to people, I highlight the freedom aspect of it. So by having an open protocol, we have the freedom to use whichever software you prefer to use, and that can be either due to whichever archaic platform you prefer to use, or it could be due to your accessibility needs or just your preferences. Whereas with these centralized providers, you often just have one choice, and it's their software, and that's it. And so if you have these special requirements, then you're really out of luck. And then the other freedom is freedom to choose your service provider. And so that means, for example, look around where I am, lots of people use WhatsApp. And if so I chose not to accept the WhatsApp terms and conditions, and because of that, I cannot contact a lot of people around me, or at least I couldn't, and that's a problem. Whereas I prefer to see a world where I can choose which provider I want to sign up with and which agreements I agree to. And so XMPP allows you to choose the software and choose your provider. And also, by nature of the open source projects, you can also become your own provider. So you can self-host an XMPP server and not have to agree to anyone else's rules but your own. And so that's what the federation model really allows, and the open protocol. It means that everyone is sort of in control of their own data and where it resides and their own communication.
Nice. One of you mentioned earlier MQTT. Sorry, not MQTT. You mentioned Internet of Things, right? And how is XMPP different to a protocol like MQTT there? Because that's more of a standard in that world these days, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, MQTT is it's different to XMPP. It's more about PubSub. So you have a server in one place, and you publish stuff to it, and people can subscribe to it. And it's a very lightweight protocol. It's suitable for if you have some very lightweight sensor nodes or whatever, and you just want to report data back, or you want to watch for changes in a system. The latest version of MQTT adds a bunch more features, including some that I think were severely lacking in the initial versions, things like error responses and things like that. So it's getting there, but XMPP is a lot richer in terms of the kinds of payloads that you can include. So MQTT is just binary, so you can basically publish anything, but it doesn't have any opinions about what that is, and both sides have to agree somehow on what the format of the payload is going to be. And so with XMPP, it's always going to be some XMPP compatible XML, and you can have, for example, XMPP has a publish subscribe feature in it, and so you can publish stuff to a PubSub node, and people can subscribe to it and receive that. And that's often used, when XMPP is used for IoT, that's often used. And but when you're publishing, you can publish in multiple formats, and the subscriber will just pick the ones that they understand. And to the extreme, we have a plugin for the open source server that I work on, Prosody, that will translate certain formats to text, so that you can just use your chat client to subscribe to these PubSub nodes, which otherwise wouldn't actually work, because your client would have to understand whatever rich format was being published. So we translate that to text, and you just receive it as a text message. And at the same time, we have specialized clients which use PubSub to publish like microblogs. So very similar to Mastodon, or previously known as Twitter, that kind of model of publishing works well for XMPP PubSub as well. So we have these clients like Movim and Liburvia, and they're using the same payload format to publish short messages mixed up with other content, and allowing people to basically browse profiles and stuff like that. And yet we have the capability to embed all different payload types and have interoperability between the different clients, which is quite powerful.
So if you're maintaining Prosody, I can't really make fun at Prosody. I suppose. No, the reason why I'm even mentioning that, we dabbled with Jitsi just a bit before we decided for BBB as the main recording infrastructure for the podcast. But a little bit of feedback, Prosody and Jitsi in general, and Java probably had a very big part in this, wasn't the easiest thing to configure, to get up and running and really to use, to be honest with you. And Prosody wasn't straightforward. I don't know, but we're digressing in terms of ecosystem. But now maybe it's the time, actually, speaking of ecosystem, maybe now is the time to shed more light on the massive ecosystem that is. I mean, you already mentioned a few projects, fair enough, but maybe you can tell a little bit about what projects have been using XMPP.
I was just up to tell one anecdote on Internet of Things, because
by all means, just go ahead. Sorry.
No, just when talking about Internet of Things, I just remember the story a few years ago where one connected his coffee machine to his chat, and he could chat to the coffee machine to make a coffee. And I just love that project. It's just a hobby thing, but yeah, that's IoT done with XMPP.
But that was text-based, so that wasn't voice recognition on the coffee machine.
I cannot tell, but yeah, maybe the next project is also voice-based.
Sweet.
Yeah, it was likely done text-based. Yeah, but in terms of commercial things that use XMPP for Internet of Things is, I think this Google Firebase cloud messaging, and I think that's the GCM backend which runs that. I remember. Yeah. Ecosystem. Yeah. I would basically differ on two sides. So as we said in the beginning, it's an open standard, and you can just access it and go crazy, do your thing, do your business with it. Many businesses run it, so this is maybe the commercial side, and they often run it. Unfortunately, also they close the server-to-server connection, so this federation. In earlier times, I think you were able to chat to WhatsApp directly through XMPP. Nowadays, I'm not sure if I don't think so. That's possible anymore. And then we have the open ecosystem where or at least I engage very much. So where you really have this true federation and exchange through, I don't know how many clients we list on our website, but there's certainly 20, 30 chat clients. There's, I think, at least 10 server software. So the Prosody you just mentioned is a server software. And then, of course, you have a lot of libraries that support you if you were up to develop your own XMPP application, which we just said is in wide ranges, chat or instant messaging, or so these classic communication setups. But there's also a lot of maybe research going on with that, or other applications, such as, for example, running a virtual power plant, or studies for smart cities, energy management in microgrids. So we saw several papers around that and applications, and of course this machine communication. I don't know which has infinite applications. You tell me. So this is basically the ecosystem. And yeah, Matt, any additions here?
Yeah, sure. I will probably want to come back to the Prosody thing. I think that's relevant. So a basic Prosody installation is actually very straightforward. At least on Debian, you just apt install Prosody, and it will serve on localhost by default, which is generally not very useful, but that's similar to how other network services in Debian work. And so you go in and you edit the config file and you change localhost to your domain name. And then the one difficult thing is that you have to obtain certificates for TLS. And that, thankfully, these days is much easier because of certificate authorities like Let's Encrypt. So you point Prosody to your certificates and then restart it after these configuration changes, and then it's working. So there is nothing else that you have to do. Obviously, then you mentioned you were configuring it as part of Jitsi, and Jitsi it's a complex.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a complex system. There are a lot of moving parts. And this is the problem. I think back when I started the Prosody project in 2008, people's expectations were quite simple. They wanted to get text messages from A to B. Most people back then only had a single device, and so a lot has changed since then. And we've gradually evolved, but I think for Prosody, it's remained rather unopinionated. And so one way we sometimes explain this is that Prosody is like, these days, a Lego block, and so we have all these different blocks that you can compose together. And so as part of a Jitsi deployment, it's the whole thing is a video conferencing suite. And Prosody is just a part of that. It's handling the connections from the web client, and it's handling the authentication, and it's allowing all the different parts of Jitsi to communicate with each other. And obviously there are a lot of moving parts, and they all have to be set up just right to be able to do that. And I'd like to think that Jitsi is easier these days to deploy, but there are certainly things that can go wrong. And if it's your first time, then there are the things that configuration issues and things that you have to deal with. But there are easier setup guides now, and that's just one particular thing that you can deploy Prosody into. And so the other one is, which is personally what I got into XMPP for in the first place, was personal chat. And so I mentioned earlier that lots of people around me use WhatsApp, and I've been working on XMPP for many years, and then a few years ago I realized that I still found it hard to explain to even my family what it was that I did, because I worked on an XMPP server, or the server software, and they don't see servers, and they just think everything just works. And so it was hard to explain how this thing has no user interface they can look at, or I can't show them any screenshots of what I work on, and yet somehow it was an alternative to WhatsApp, except they can't go and search for Prosody in the App Store and download it and use it. So I ended up thinking long and hard about why it was that after I finished a day at work, I would go downstairs and find my family talking to each other on WhatsApp and not XMPP. And somehow I decided I must have failed. And in some ways I did. I realized that we needed this end-to-end stack of software. And so coming back to Prosody as a building block, it is very unopinionated. And so I needed to build something that was a bit more designed just for a personal chat system. And so I ended up working on Snicket. And Snicket is basically so a bit like how Jitsi deploys Prosody as part of a video conferencing suite. The idea of Snicket is basically, if you just want self-hosted messaging for a small group, such as a family or a club or a small business or whatever, you spend 5 to 10 minutes setting up Snicket. All you need is a domain name and SSH to a Linux server, and there's a quick start guide on the website. And the goal was that once it's set up, you have everything that you would expect to compete with one of the more popular messaging apps. So everything just works out of the box. So whereas with Prosody, although I said it's very easy to get a basic installation up, you just have to provide your domain name and your certificates. You then have to go extra steps once you want to integrate, say, some kind of web interface and a way to share files and stuff like that. None of that is terribly hard, but it is time consuming, and there's a lot to tweak. And some of our users, Prosody users, they love tweaking and they love learning about XMPP and all these internals. But a lot of people, including increasingly myself these days, don't have time for all that kind of endless tweaking and stuff. We just want something that works and doesn't require too much maintenance. So I built Snicket for my own family and also for others in a similar situation. And it includes file sharing and all the stuff you need for audio and video calls and stuff like that. It sets up its own certificates and so on. So there's nothing to configure, nothing to do. You just set it up and it works. And I think this has been, for me, a big thing to improve the XMPP ecosystem, just from my own perspective, because now my family all use XMPP. Well, they, as far as they're concerned, they're using Snicket, and they use it for messaging each other, and it has replaced the family WhatsApp group. Now it's a family Snicket group, and now I can participate in family chats again. And as a bonus, I have small children, and during lockdown, they were able to have an Android tablet, just an old tablet that we had lying around, and they have Snicket on there, and they can video call their grandparents. And obviously, they're too young for a phone and a phone number and a WhatsApp account and all that, but they were able to just, I taught them how to use it, and they were able to just pick it up whenever they wanted. And I didn't have to worry about, signing them up to any agreements or privacy issues or anything like that. So I think overall, I'm really pleased with these kinds of innovations in XMPP and the way things are looking for the future.
Links, of course, will be in the show notes about Snicket. Sorry,
sure.
But Matthew, did you really fail? And Snicket is probably the counterexample, because with WhatsApp and similar products, let's put it this way: A, you have a single point of failure; B, you don't have control; C, you can't host it yourself. And if you are privacy inclined, which I reckon more and more people are today, never mind breaches, downtime, what have you. And of course, I get it that not everybody is technically inclined, but I reckon there's just a cotton industry out there of managed service providers that are more than happy to host this for you under your own privacy rules and all the rest of it at a fee. And which goes to show, actually, that again, you can make money from open source software.
You're absolutely right. In many ways, we never lost in those regards, but actually people still sign up for WhatsApp knowing that it's owned by Facebook and knowing that Facebook use user data for profiling and targeting and stuff. So yes, but I think what's important is that I think we need to give people the choice, and they need to know that the choice exists, because otherwise they will just grimace and sign up for WhatsApp anyway, and they'll click through that terms of service and just click OK. So you're right. I think a lot of it is about showing them that alternatives exist, and hosting is definitely one of those. I realized pretty early on that although I was making this really straightforward self-hosting option for Snicket, there are still many people who would want to use it who don't have the skills or even just the time to self-host and maintain things themselves. So I've been working on the past couple of years a Snicket hosting service, which it's currently in beta, and I've not charged anyone for it, thanks to some sponsors. But I'm planning to leave beta soon, and that will hopefully become an income for the project and help me to continue development of the apps and the server side and things like that. And I'm hoping it will be a nice, straightforward, honest revenue stream for funding the project, because I've been through a lot of different funding options to try and get Snicket going, and all of them have their pros and cons. I mean, I could probably talk a whole other hour about open source funding and my experience with it. But I think just simply offering a service and asking people to pay for that service is just the oldest one there is, the oldest funding model there is, and I think it just works.
So, Mr. Zuckerberg, if you're listening, you heard it here first. There might be competition on the horizon. I'm joking. Needless to say, Matthew, more than happy to include the URL of this budding enterprise in the show notes. Just let me know.
I wanted to add to that solution also, and while it's so simple to set up and keeps the independence of the owner or who deploys Snicket, it still enables federation or attaches to the federation, so it doesn't exclude or vendor lock you in. So same as many other XMPP client servers and solutions.
And that's another aspect of it that I was trying to solve. I think what happened in the past with the whole Google Talk thing, that really happened. When Google Talk announced that it was going to be XMPP based, we rejoiced, and when it launched, we had millions more XMPP users overnight, and we thought that was it. That was the best thing that could have happened, and in some ways it was, but ultimately we saw the reverse side of that, which is that overnight they pulled the plug and they removed millions of XMPP users from the network. And so that was only possible because they had that control over a significant portion of the network. They don't really have that with email. Obviously they are a super large node on the email network as well, and that does cause various problems if you try and self-host email in 2023, but you can still do it, and they can't easily just turn that off because there would be a lot of complaints from not just individuals but also businesses who have their own mail servers. So I wanted to make sure that any potential future direction that I went in with XMPP was not about making some new service that was centralized, or not even centralized with federation, but completely, focused on having small servers. And I think that makes for a more robust network where everyone is in control of their own small part of the network, and there's no one completely in control of, over half of it.
Okay. Going back to the protocol side of things. Protocols are normally long in the making and, let's say, done by many interested parties. How does that work with XMPP? Do you have a simpler model? Is it suffer the same kind of issues as other protocol specs, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, we have a very open standards process. So the XMPP Standards Foundation is very open. There's no membership or fee to join, as it were. You can become an XSF member, but that's not necessary to participate in standards development. All you need is basically the ability to read specifications, write specifications, and so on. And there are plenty of examples of those on the xmpp.org website. And so we have developers who just come along with an idea, and we help them write their proposal and get that accepted. So we have a technical council who are elected annually from within the community, and their job is basically just to review the specification changes and things that have been proposed, and then that then feeds into the whole standards process. And we have various phases. So a proposal starts out, after it's accepted, it gets tagged experimental, and at that stage it's kind of encouraged for developers to try it out and give some feedback and so on. And then once it has a couple of implementations interoperable with each other, then we'll move it on to stable, and that's when things really start to slow down, and we start polishing it rather than exploring. And so we have a bunch of experimental stuff that was proposed, and then for one reason or another never really made it off the ground. And then the stuff that succeeded, then we moved that to stable. And then every year we publish basically a roundup of all the stable specifications that we expect clients of different types to be implementing, and servers as well. So for example, we'll say for a mobile instant messaging client that's using XMPP, in 2023, we expect you to be supporting these features. And here are the specification links. And so each year we review the recommendations. So, we'll add reactions, and we'll remove, I don't know, some old stuff or whatever that's not relevant anymore. So, using these annual compliance suites, then we can gradually evolve the protocol and also the ecosystem just by sending the message to developers about which direction we're heading in and which things we're leaving behind.
And maybe to add here, many of the open clients, they also define or have the description of a project where they define how they apply to these compliance suites. And for example, on our website, we show how they apply to it, and then you can also check for your requirements and expectations on that. I had one addition here to say, or maybe one repetition. You don't need to be member in any way to propose new developments or so the extensions and or participate in discussions. So that's what we mean by open. We usually organize it around either our chats or the mailing lists, and of course we have the open repository hosted where you can also follow that process.
Nice. And how many of these kind of extensions are we looking at, and how are in development? Can you shed a bit more light on that one?
I don't know which number we're up to, but I think we're nearly at 500.
482.
482.
Very good.
So of those 482, a majority of them are specs that were experimental, and then we've just archived, as it were. We call them deferred. And so if someone is not maintaining that document and just lets it sit there, then eventually it will just move to deferred status, which just means no one is actively working on it. But if someone later thinks, I really have this problem and this looks like the way to do it, then they can always revive that again and try and push it forwards. But it does need those implementations to be able to move forwards in the standards process. So as for actively required, for example, in the compliance suites, there really aren't that many. Maybe just a dozen or so that you have to comply with, but then of those, sometimes there's like a dependency tree kind of thing going on. So another project that I work on is modernxmpp.org, and that has basically an overview of XMPP from a client developer's perspective, and it goes through basically what's in the compliance suites, but it tells you what each part does, and it also has some extra notes about a user interface design and the rationale for why certain things are the way they are, and just an explanation of how things fit together, and also it acts as a place to document quirks in implementations in the ecosystem. So if a particular popular piece of XMPP software has a bug or behaves in a certain way that's not intuitive, then that's a place to document that kind of thing. So that's useful if you're writing an XMPP client, just to make sure that you have the best information at hand, and not just the raw protocol stuff, but lots of interesting stuff on top. So I really tried to make it a good resource for that, and that was partly driven out of, before I worked on Snicket, wanting to provide some user interface guidance to developers, because that was something that I felt was lacking in the ecosystem, and everyone had different ways of doing things, and there wasn't much consistency. I think in the past 3 to 5 years, there's been a lot more focus on that, and it's been nice seeing a lot of the active clients get a lot more polish applied to their user interfaces.
Got it. Yeah, there's something that you mentioned earlier is which is, as you say, a subject for another podcast. But we do cover this on many of our episodes. It's the open source funding piece. I don't know if you want to just give us your thoughts on that in a nutshell, because it's a common topic that we see.
Yeah. So for Snicket, I've done individual donations, which surprised me with the number of people just willing to support this project, and so that was apart from the the income, that was just inspiring to me to carry on working on it, knowing that there were people out there who actually really wanted to see the project succeed. But it's very hard to get enough donations from individuals to actually quit work and just work full time on open source. So I did apply for a few grants, and I did receive a couple of NGI grants. One was NGI DAPC, who work on data interoperability things, and the other was from NGI Assure, thanks to NLNet, who have been funding loads of awesome stuff recently. And so those were really helpful, and they helped me to just focus on particular things for a while, full time, and just work on different aspects. They were also limiting me because during the period, for example, when I was working on the interoperability stuff, I wasn't able to then go and fix bugs in the apps that people were reporting because I had certain deadlines to meet, and so the grants worked in terms of me being able to work on open source while also being able to pay my bills, but they didn't necessarily work out so well from the health of the project perspective. So I wouldn't say no to future grants, but I've been trying to look for alternatives. Currently, I am back to donations and some individual sponsors and some partnerships with, for example, JMP.chat have been sponsoring me to work on Snicket, and they have this bridge between XMPP and the phone network, and so they have this cool setup where you can basically purchase a number from them, and when someone dials it, it will ring through to your XMPP client, and when they send an SMS, it will forward that to your XMPP client as well. And so they're very interested in obviously having good polished clients in the ecosystem, and having people able to get XMPP accounts easily, because otherwise they have customers purchase a phone number and then they say, right, now where do my calls go? And then we have to explain XMPP to them, and they don't know where to begin. So Snicket is a good entry point for people to the XMPP ecosystem. So they've been really helpful in just helping the project get off the ground, and helping with development of the apps as well. So I think that's probably everything that I've tried so far, and I'm happy with where we are now. But obviously, I'm hoping to get the hosting service out of beta, and then hoping that will become an actual sustainable revenue for the project, so that it's more self-sustaining rather than relying on external contributions only.
Okay, guys. We could talk about this for hours, but just literally 2 sentences. Where do you see this going? And as I said, let's keep this short and sweet because we have to wrap this up in some stage. So XMPP, the future, in 2 words or 2 sentences.
The future is that everyone has an XMPP address, just like everyone has an email address. And I'm excited by things like the EU's Digital Markets Act requiring the big providers to open up. I wish we had that before Google Talk shut down their XMPP. And I'm really hoping that this next generation of providers will be forced to remain interoperable one way or another. And I actually don't really care about the protocol. I care more about the interoperability than anything else, because I really value that freedom of choice.
So people, you heard it here first. Forget about Mastodon, forget about Matrix. XMPP on the rebound, so to speak.
XMPP, the universal messaging standard.
Indeed. And with that, before we do the feedback, what are your POXes? POXes, of course, being picks of the week, anything goes. What has crossed your path worth mentioning? Martin normally does Amish adult entertainment sites. I normally cover movies. I'm joking, but really anything goes. So why don't we start with you, Eddie?
Good question. What goes by me is a book on the Mid-Sea and unfortunately, all its pollution. That's not really good because
The
most of
Mid-Sea.
so it's Mediterranean Sea. Sorry.
Sorry. Okay.
Sorry,
fair
wrong
enough.
word.
Links
Mediterranean,
hopefully will be in the show notes.
big sea between Europe and Africa.
Yes, an author title would help. No, yes, maybe.
Give me a moment. I need to find it.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a lot of pollution, but also there's a lot of potential on if we do something, then sea certainly is capable to regenerate. We saw that in the Pacific Ocean. So that is my hypothesis.
Okay. While Eddie is looking for references, Matthew, what's your POX?
I think I would like to give a shout out and a thanks to another open source project, Home Assistant, and the related project ESP Home. I had a water leak this weekend in my house, and just by piecing together random bits of electronics and Home Assistant and ESP Home, I've been able to rig up a moisture sensor to detect the drying progress of my house and various other things. So it's been really useful, and I was just amazed at how that ecosystem has managed to flourish with open source.
It's just amazing because I hear people talking about Home Assistant contexts ranging from, let's put it this way, growing not exactly regulated substances right up to controlling their home from very far away, in terms of if you want to be home at 6 and you want to have a hot bath awaiting you or the heat being turned on, you can do that. And I have yet to kind of double with Home Assistant myself, but it looks very, very interesting from the outside.
I've had it running a while, but yeah, now that I can get an XMPP message if the leak happens again, being able to set that up just with a few clicks was, and I did do a bit of soldering for the leak detector itself, but by and large it was so much easier than when I used to do that kind of thing, maybe 10 years ago.
Martin, your POX.
Yeah, my POX is it's just interesting the leak detection bit, because I thought, where are you going to go with electronics and water there? that kind of makes sense. Yeah.
It's all about the context, Martin.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. No, my POX is something for if you want some light entertainment. There's a new series of Ghosts going on, which is quite amusing. This is a program on the BBC. I think it's going for a while, but it's really about someone who can see all the previous occupants and have conversations with them and stuff like that. So it's quite amusing, just sort of light entertainment, really, for
like a haunted house or something.
Something like that. Yep.
That's pretty close to Westminster, no? As in the government. Maybe I'm wrong. Is that a haunted house too?
What about yourself?
Martin said slightly diverging from the subject. No, Martin, my POX.
This is purely fictional, yes.
Of course, yes, it would be, yes, of course. No, my POX is actually a TV show, a format called Creepshow. It's been around for a while. I think it made its debut in the 10th, if I'm not mistaken, as in 16, maybe 17, maybe 18, I can't remember, but it's now in its 4th season, and there's also a movie, if I'm not completely mistaken. And if you're into something like humor, creepy stuff, I just started to watch the 2nd season, if I'm completely mistaken. And there's an episode with a couple, not a couple, but rather siblings trying to sell or to rent out their apparently haunted horse, which is really, really, really funny. So links, of course, will be in the show notes, so don't miss out on that. And with that, Martin, I reckon it's time for the feedback.
Yeah, go on.
I found the title.
Oh, go on. Yeah.
Again?
Go for it.
Sorry. So it's Die Welt des Mittelmeeres, the world of
Thank
the
you. Yes. Of course, the
Mediterranean
reference.
Sea,
Yeah.
from Ferdinand Braude, George Struby, and Maurice Aymard. I hope I pronounced everyone right. So
Okay,
happy
of course.
reading.
In that case, links within the show notes if my favorite search engine can find it. It's also available in English or just German?
I think in this case just German, unfortunately.
Okay, got it. Fair enough. So people,
It's okay. We have German listeners, I'm sure.
yes, and for the rest, there's DeepL and maybe ChatGPT, Google Translate, you name it. Okay, on to the feedback.
Yes.
Okay, a lady by the alias name, whatever, of Heidi Wenger sent feedback saying, "Hello, I found your Linux podcast, but geez, it was hard to comprehend how to
Yes.
get listening to a certain episode. I spent minutes to figure out this and then jump to the archive website. Could there, for example, be a simple play button in front of the episode or something? I bet many people leave the site because, honestly, it's messy. Marketing, if you're listening,
Yes.
shame on you."
Well, we have a handy tip for Heidi, no? I think.
But Martin, first of all, let me blame marketing because
Oh, okay. Yeah.
in
Do we
case
have
you
any?
didn't
We don't
fire
have any, really, yeah.
yes. So marketing, if you're still
For good reasons.
part,
Yeah.
exactly, if you're still part of Linux in-law, shame on you. The memo probably will be in the email. Do something about it. Yes, but also Heidi made one further remark. Otherwise, great content when one gets to it, and great, of course, is spelled with capital letters. So I suppose that's a little bit of positive feedback.
Well, unless that's referring to the length of the episodes.
Yes. In that case, it would be great. Otherwise, long content. No, I don't know, but maybe I'm mistaken. Okay. Heidi, before Martin gets into technical analysis of your feedback, let me say one thing. The website is not for hipsters. The website is merely a what's the word I'm looking for? A bait for the RSS feed. Because forget about the website. The website is, as I say, just a marketing front. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The main point behind the website is actually the following. It does contain an RSS feed, because what actually the majority of people who found that, if personal feedback is anything to go by, that I've picked up over the years, they go to their favorite podcatcher, enter Linux in-laws, and up comes the RSS feed. And that's all there is to it. No, Martin, your turn.
Yes. Well, there was a question about play buttons, right? So if you go to your device, whichever you are using, there are usually things called apps, and they have a play button. So we are on Google Play, on Amazon, on iTunes, Spotify, you name it. The app of your choice has a play button to play us.
Exactly, and we are also featured by some Metacrawlers, so if you're using an open source podcatcher like AntennaPod, just search for Linux in-laws, you will come across the RSS feed. Okay, and then...
yes, there's another feedback.
There's more feedback.
More feedback from Adam?
Jay Adams, exactly. It's read in-laws. I don't know where I would casually come across topics like state-sponsored distributions other than the Linux in-laws. Any comment on this, Martin?
Well, it says it all, really. It's
it does, yes.
If you need some obscure topic,
absolutely. If you're looking for common-based distributions, Linux in-laws is your podcast of choice, right?
Indeed, yeah.
But hang on, he said more.
I think we forgot one, right?
In-laws. You forgot to mention Ghidra, whatever that is. I reckon it's another common distribution.
Yes.
And Shay, we will check it out, rest assured. Thank you for the feedback, much appreciated. And I'm sure that if we think about another episode on common distributions, we're certainly gonna reach out to you. Rest assured. And with that, Martin, I think we're almost done, right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, thanking our guests for tonight.
Yes, of course. Thank you much for being here, and hope to have you back at some stage.
Thank you very much for the invitation and hosting.
Yes, thank you for having us.
This is the Linux in-laws.
You come for the knowledge,
but stay for the madness.
Thank you for listening.
This podcast is licensed under the latest version of the Creative Commons license, type Attribution Share Alike. Credits for the intro music go to Blue Sea Roosters for their song Solid Market, to Twin Flames for their piece called The Flow, used for the segment intros, and finally to Celestial Ground for their song Sweet Justice, used by The Dark Side. You find these and other ditties licensed under CC at Jamendo, a website dedicated to liberate the music industry from choking copyright legislation and other crap concepts.